United States consumes 60% of all the world's drugs on a daily basis. Every day, 5,000 new Americans will try cocaine for the first time, while 15 million are already alcoholics, 20 million are regular marijuana users, and 6 million have what can be categorized as a serious drug problem. 14 out of every 100 employees abuse drugs on the job. A driver who abuses drugs is a hazard to you, your coworkers, and the general public. The questions facing you as a supervisor are, how can I tell if a driver is on drugs? And if so, what do I do? What is my responsibility? Well, these are not easy questions, and with the new federal regulations, it's important that you know the answers. We're here to help you answer these questions and fulfill your new obligations. On this tape, you will hear one of the country's top experts on the laws and policies concerning occupational substance abuse, Bruce Wilkinson. That's why we brought his lectures to you on videotape. In this tape, Bruce talks about substance abuse in the workplace and how the DOT regulations affect you, the supervisor. Both Bruce and I will show you how to deal appropriately with substance abuse and fulfill your obligations at the same time. The key phrase to remember while viewing this tape is document, don't diagnose.
My name is Bruce Wilkinson, and I'm president of a firm called Workplace Consultants out of New Orleans, Louisiana. My background is one of safety and health. My degrees are in occupational safety and health and safety engineering. I've been in the field of loss prevention or safety and health for about 18 years now, and specialized in occupational substance abuse over the last 8 years. We're here today to talk about substance abuse in the workplace and how it affects you as a supervisor or a manager. And basically, supervisors and managers have an important role in any type of substance abuse program. You have to actually be accountable for the safety and health of your employees in your crews, your departments, your workplace, your offices, or in the field. No matter where you work in the transportation industry, you are both responsible and accountable for the safety and health of yourself, others under you, and the general public. It's the general public and the type of work you do in the transportation industry that is now regulated by federal and state legislation. I want you to know that we don't feel we have any more illicit drug use or alcoholism in the transportation industry as you do in any other industry. The problem is two things. Number one, we're regulated by the federal government. Number two, we're required by law to protect the employee, and who else? Public safety. Make a reasonable effort to protect public safety. And therefore, substance abuse in our industry cannot be tolerated. Everybody, when they start a drug testing or a substance abuse program, they think they're only going to find people that they don't care about or people that don't deserve to have a job anyway. And that's fine when you find certain people that you don't mind losing, then all of a sudden you find your vice president or your dispatcher or your best truck driver or your safety person. Our big accident problem, in our opinion, in the industry is the casual user. The drug addict you see because he misses too many days, and we have other policies and procedures. Or he tries to stop on his own and he staggers in one day and withdrawal. The casual user, they look like you and me, but they do not react to unexpected situations as a normal person. We simply call this the mystery crash. What about the train accident? What we have 15, 16 dead, 85 injured and crippled? A casual user, a brakeman and an engineer were using the day before or that morning marijuana and PCP. Well, why didn't they test them when they got in the cab? They looked like everyone else, but they missed an oncoming train and several signals that says you're on the wrong track. Now ask the parents of the 14, 15 dead if they should have been tested. I want you to know 60 to 80% of the casual users will choose to keep their job and to get rid of the casual use. The reason they did both before is that you didn't say they had to choose. You were granting permission. You didn't say it was unacceptable. The person who can't quit is the addicted person. People avoid policy violations and keep their job when they're clearly forewarned and they've been given a fair and equitable but tough and consistent policy that you are going to enforce on an equitable basis. Most people will keep their job. Now, substance abuse programs are called that because they allow us to address any form of drug and alcohol abuse in the workplace where the objective is to what? Provide a safe and helpful place to work. Remember, that's the background, safe and helpful place to work. You don't have programs in the workplace because drugs are just illegal, because this is not a criminal situation where you're trying to arrest employees. We're not handcuffing people and pulling truck drivers out of trucks and say, book them down on Murder 1, Hawaii 5-0. We're not doing any of those things. These are policies and procedures. Substance abuse programs allow us to address all the laws, including drug testing laws, yet still address substances of abuse. There are many employers in the transportation industry and supervisors who will see this tape who may choose to only address the Department of Transportation drug testing guidelines, and that's certainly up to them. But if you're like a lot of supervisors and a lot of companies in the transportation industry, there are other policies and work rules that apply on drug and alcohol abuse that are not specifically covered just for a DOT driver. So you're going to hear a lot of all those today, and then your own company naturally will decide how this affects your own policy. We're going to talk about all the elements that surround this title page today in our program. Beginning at the top, we see the word policies and procedures. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, policies regulate the workplace. Now, there's the first thing I want you to remember today, or write this down if you can't, but this is something you need to know if you ever have to testify in a court of law or an unemployment referee, or if you have collective bargain agreements in your industry, you have to testify at a grievance and an arbitration. For the purposes of substance abuse programs, nothing in the workplace is illegal. For the purpose of substance abuse programs, nothing in the workplace is illegal. Everything's got to be prohibited and unauthorized. Everything's got to be prohibited and unauthorized. Now, let me give you an example of that. The DOT requires that if you're using drugs or alcohol, that I remove you from that vehicle. Now, just because the law requires me to pull you from that vehicle, the law doesn't order what to do with you, because that would be co-employment. So now what takes over here? The policy, right? Violations of the DOT law working in scope of employment had to violate some kind of written what? Policy of some kind. So since that's not an illegal act, it has to be a prohibited act. So violations in the workplace where you're going to discipline people, suspend them or fire them or send them to EAP programs or just discharge people or offer referral for help based on performance problems, all these things must be some sort of misconduct of some kind. Procedures are something that affect all supervisors and managers in the transportation industry, and specifically you folks in this room. Procedures are called SOPs, Standard Operation Procedures, and the courts are looking at them heavily in the 1990s. The DOT has specific requirements on what type of procedures you have to follow, and we will cover those in your education program today. Now, why are they important for you and why are they important for executive management? Because our least trained supervisor is usually the one that gets us sued as the agent of the corporation. But the most important thing we need procedures are simply to do this, to teach you how not to get sued and how not to get us sued, and to teach you how to do the following. And here's the number 2 thing you need to write down as part of your training program today. Supervisors and managers in the transportation industry, both in union and non-union environments, public and private environments, have to do one thing and one thing only. When it comes to policy violations in the workplace, ladies and gentlemen, every one of you has the right to document policy violations and diagnose nothing. Here's the next thing you need to remember or write down. You cannot make an employee or your children believe that drugs and alcohol are bad for them if they think it's good. You can tell them there are consequences for those decisions, and it's unacceptable. As long as the option you're giving employees is based on what? A legal option that you have the right to present. That's the difference here. To the left-hand side, you see employee counseling. There are several elements of employee counseling or access to hotlines or 1-800 numbers and community agencies required under the EAP training components of your DOT program. The most important thing I'd like to stress to you is that there are several state laws where they require that employers offer help or access to counseling or rehabilitation. It's important that supervisors and managers be able to prove that you offered an employee access to it. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, you're required under the DOT drug testing program, and including the Drug-Free Workplace Act, which I'll explain later, and many other substance abuse policies and procedures, to know what the disciplinary action is as a result of violating company policy or state and federal laws. In fact, if a drug user or a drug addict and alcoholic does not know there are consequences for their actions, they have no reason to what? To quit using.
Most company policies are designed to create a truly safe workplace for their employees and the public. With a comprehensive substance abuse program, you don't lose people, you lose drugs in the workplace. That brings us to another training requirement DOT has imposed on your company. You and your drivers must be trained in the effects of substance abuse and their accompanying signs and symptoms. DOT expressly prescribes minimum safety standards to detect and deter the use of the following 5 drug types: marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, opiates, and phencyclidine, PCP. Their use in the workplace is cause for action regardless of the employee's performance or safety record. During the next part of Bruce's presentation on these 5 drug types, you will see that he holds a form.
In the drugs of abuse section, in this little blue form, you will see that most of the types of controlled substances are outlined, and I've checked off on mine the 5 scheduled drugs. Let's start up at the top. We see the marijuana. These are the 5 prohibited drugs by law under the DOT program. Now, marijuana is called weed, pot, grass, THC, Acapulco Gold. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, the marijuana in the 1990s is 100 to 200% stronger than it was in the 60s. Now, if you can see further on this list that's in your manual here in this book, you see that marijuana can be taken orally or smoked. The signs of use of marijuana are difficulty in concentrating, euphoria, short-term memory loss, dilated pupils. The next scheduled drug, now remember we have all drugs of abuse here as well, but I want you to pay close attention to the 5 scheduled drugs of abuse. Cocaine. Coke, flake, snow, crack. Cocaine is snorted or injected, smoked, freebase. The signs of abuse are increased alertness, excitation, euphoria, increased pulse rates, increased blood pressure, loss of appetite, insomnia. These are called the stimulants. These are called the uppers. You also need to know that the effects of an overdose or the effects of the employee are agitation, increase in body temperature, hallucinations, convulsions, possible death. The number 3 scheduled drug is amphetamine. Over-the-counter, certain over-the-counter amphetamines can cause problem, and you're not allowed to what? Abuse what? Prescribed amphetamines, huh? Can you have a prescribed amphetamine? Yes. But an amphetamine, crystal meth, the methamphetamine, forms of amphetamines are scheduled under the Department of Transportation guideline. Amphetamine is a scheduled drug and the DOT certainly wants to know about it. There's a policy violation to use amphetamines and operate what kind of vehicle? A commercial vehicle. A commercial vehicle. These are the types of common names for amphetamines. Why do you think some people lose weight taking certain types of diet pills? What are in there? Certain type of cousins of an amphetamines, right? Phenylpropanolamine and cousins of an amphetamine, because you have a loss of what? Appetite. It's an appetite suppression. These are the signs of abuse, the same as the cocaine, same effects. Our number 4 scheduled drug is opium. Paregoric, Dover's powder, Papatolin or whatever. But opium is a scheduled drug. It's come from, and the opium plant itself is a scheduled drug, and it is an illicit drug under the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. You cannot have it legally for any reason. Opium can be oral or smoked. Euphoria, drowsiness, respiratory depression, constricted pupils. Folks, this is the drug where all of a sudden the vital signs start to what? Slow down, right? Like a barbiturate, like a depressant, and what? You just die. Serious, serious drug. Last but not least, on the scheduled drugs, PCP, phencyclidine. PCP is commonly called what? Angel dust. They commonly sprinkle this on marijuana cigarette. Some try to call clickers or clickums. The main thing I want you to understand here is you're subject to flashbacks like LSD for up to 3 years. It's a scheduled hallucinogen. It's commonly in its liquid form or sprinkled on a marijuana cigarette. Now we're seeing where crack gives you such a jolt higher than cocaine, but it's short-lived. They're lacing crack with PCP and are calling it space basing. You got a raving maniac with PCP where there's no pain threshold and they have no idea they're hurting and they have an unbelievable amount of adrenaline and false strength.
Once again, read through your manual and its appendices for more in-depth coverage of this information, and especially for the next section, where Bruce covers the 4 standard operating procedures of constructive confrontation used to address policy violations: identification, documentation, confirmation, and finally, confrontation. These procedures are important. If you use them the way Bruce presents them, step by step, your concerns about challenging a suspected drug user will be alleviated. You will know how to handle suspected drug use.
There are 4 ways for you to address policy violations as they affect performance and as they affect safety. And this will lead up to our reasonable cause testing under the DOT. But you must learn them in order, so let's take the top. The first thing I want you to learn is the top of that form. We see the word identification. Write the number 1 next to that word identification, because you must learn these in order. Now, remember I told you at the beginning of our training program that you must learn how to identify what? Policy violations in the workplace, including drug and alcohol abuse. Everybody agree with that? Shake your head like there's a sign of life from this group. Okay, all right. Now, once you've agreed to that, let's give you an example how to identify policy violations. Compare this to other policies. Let's start off with something simple. How do you identify absenteeism in the workplace? Well, there's an early warning sign, they don't show up. Is this a good sign for most of you? But you know what? If you have a worker who's not an hourly worker and doesn't punch a card, how do you ever reprimand, suspend, and terminate a salaried worker from missing work if you don't ever write down when they missed work? So when you identify absenteeism, you just write down that they're gone. Not if it's excused or unexcused. Write down that the worker's not here. How would you identify Valium or controlled substances in the workplace? You don't. You don't identify 67 Valiums. You identify 67 white pills with a V in the middle, and there's no prescription bottle, and the worker appears to have amnesia as to how they got in his hand. Remember, because how would you like to go to court and identify those Valiums again as I put down 10 piles of the pills? Right? Okay. How do you identify marijuana in the workplace? You don't. But you can identify a discrepancy to the policy, and I'll cover that in a minute. How do you identify someone staggering on the job, climbing up into a truck, who's an alcoholic or a drug addict? Ladies and gentlemen, you do not. That same alcoholic thing going through your mind, that same drug use going through your mind could be diabetes, could be insulin shock, a barbiturate overdose. So let's move to number 2, documentation. How do you document these examples? Well, it's been 3 days since Bob called in. I had to put someone else on his truck. There's no unexcused absence slip or anything like that. Now I've documented a what? Unexcused absence. Everybody agree with that? It's not here. Didn't get a phone call. There's no note. It's been 3 days. How do I document the value? We have a form that we hope people would use, or one similar. Let your attorney design one for you or your consultant. And it's called simply a discrepancy documentation form. A discrepancy documentation form or behavior incident documentation form allows you to document what you found as it relates to policy violations, or to document an employee's behavior which you felt was a safety concern. You know what's good about that? If you ever go to court, an unemployment referee or a grievance or an arbitration 2 or 3 years from now, you have the right by law to see the incident report you wrote to refresh your memory. How can you refresh your memory from something you didn't write 3 years earlier? So how do I document marijuana? I would document on a discrepancy form of some kind, similar to what we have in your manual, or one that you can develop yourself that says this. Hark, 5 hand-rolled cigarettes twisted at both ends containing some form of leafy green vegetable matter. And you put it in a chain of custody envelope like a drug test bottle, and you send it to a toxicologist, got 67.5 college degrees. And the next day he calls you up, just like it happens to me all the time. Bruce, you know those 5 hand-rolled cigarettes twisted at both ends containing some form of leafy green vegetable matter? Steve said, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but that was marijuana. I was shocked, appalled, dismayed. I was taken aback. And, you know, I was so stupid, they wouldn't let me go to court and testify. The expert had to go to court, and I went fishing. So the laboratory said this discrepancy to your policy turned out to be an illicit drug, which just so happens to be a violation of written company policy. Isn't that amazing? And you'd be just as shocked that it's marijuana as the employee was. You have to understand that concept, what I just taught you. How do you document that worker staggering around? Did they have a staggered gait, a slurred speech, dilated pupils, constricted pupils, red and watery eyes? When you confronted them, did they seem disoriented? Did you give them an opportunity to explain their behavior? Why is that important? Because isn't it important that we know that right before you faint that you have nitroglycerin tablets in your pocket and they should be under your tongue? Is it important for us to know that as we call an ambulance and a paramedic and an EMT? Yeah. It's also important that if you ever have to testify in court, that you prove to a court of law or a grievance or an arbitrator or an unemployment referee that you gave an employee in front of a witness an opportunity to explain the behavior as you saw it. What would you do if a person of your family was staggering around? You wouldn't send them for a drug test first. First thing you say is, honey, are you okay, right? Are you all right? Is everything fine? Wouldn't you do that? Be normal. Treat people like human beings first. All right, now let's go down to confirmation, number 3. Well, you know what? The lab test came back and said that leafy green vegetable matter was marijuana. Were you shocked or what? Huh? The lab test came back and said the 67 pills with a V in the middle was 100 milligrams of Valium, and you have a policy that requires you tell me you're on a tranquilizer, and you didn't. I checked John's file, and this is the 6th time he's missed 2 or 3 days or more together in a 5-week period, and I have progressive absenteeism, progressive discipline. Gee, the doctor called back and said, the reason Tommy was staggering around like that because he was in insulin shock and he's a diabetic and he hadn't eaten that day, taken his blood sugar account or taken his shot, and aren't you glad you didn't accuse your truck driver of being a drug addict and an alcoholic? The point being is, folks, you are not allowed to guess what's wrong. You are required to document that what's wrong is apparently violating company what? Policy. Let's go on to number 4. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've identified company policy violations in respect to safety and health, substance abuse, and DOT violations, if you've documented them prudently as a violation, if you've confirmed them that it's a violation, then and only then do you do employee confrontation, which is number 4. And let's take what I just taught you on identify, document, confirm, and confront, and take you through a little story. Bob, you've been a good employee here now for the last 5 years with our company. But lately, let's take a look at the record. 5 unexcused absences within the last 3 or 4 weeks. 4 tardies. The quality control of your work is down. We're having to have other people clean up your rig when you come back in because you're not doing it. Every time I confront your behavior, you tell me it's none of my business and leave me alone and walk off. I've looked at your work and job description and nothing has changed. You haven't said that you're hurt or you're sick. I've got to assume there's something personal going on in your life because your performance is going crazy. Hey, call this confidential number for help, or here's a list of outside resources, or 1-800 numbers, or community agencies. Now, maybe there's something personal going on in your life that we don't know about. I can't make you go, but I can tell you that I'm not only your supervisor, but I'm your friend too. I'd like to help, but I'm no expert, and I may make matters worse. And remember, you don't have to call any of these numbers. But here's what I expect to improve over the next 2 weeks in the form of performance. And let's make an appointment right now for us to get back together at 9 o'clock on the 18th of the month. And if I don't see some changes in these patterns that are deteriorating over all the times I've disciplined you, you're subject to further disciplinary action, which could include suspension and discharge. Have a nice day. Is that perfectly legal? Can you also address a drug user and alcoholic under that documentation? Absolutely. What did you do extra that you've normally not done? Just offered that list I told you about, which takes 30 seconds and you get to defend yourself in court. You've also said that I may lose my job. What's the wrong way to do this? Hey, Bob, I've been talking to you about your performance lately. You missed work, 4 or 5 unexcused absences in the last 3 weeks, 5 tardies and all that sort of stuff. You're insubordinate to me. Your coworkers want transfers, and what are you on, dope or what? Have you been drinking again? Yeah, I've been smelling that freaky stuff on your breath. Those breath mints don't fool me. Let's test the sucker, right? Clients, good night. You see the difference in those 2 little stories? One is based on pure what? Documentation of performance. The other is based on speculation, huh? Is this defamation of character? Could be. Do y'all see where I'm going with that? That's the right and wrong way. It's called constructive confrontation. If you're under the Drug-Free Workplace Act or the DOT program, your EAP training program should teach supervisors how to confront performance and what? Refer out somewhere. But you can't make them go. And you never discipline because they didn't go, only because performance what? Didn't come up to satisfactory level.
Identification, documentation, confirmation, and confrontation. For the next section, you'll watch actors play the roles of supervisors and drivers in recreated scenes that will help you anticipate how to handle the situations you'll face. We realize your job involves many other responsibilities, but for training purposes, the scenes focus on one problem at a time. After each story, we suggest you stop the tape and think about what you would have done. When you start up the tape again, I'll give you the expert's suggestions so that you can compare how your ideas match up with their guidelines. How many times have you seen someone on the job behaving irregularly compared to their usual behavior? Now, think about how you dealt with it. Did you ignore it? Did you let it slide by? Or did you deal with the problem? In this first story, watch how Sonny handles the situation.
So, you think the Giants are going to do anything this year?
Hey, I'm a Giant fan. They can do no wrong.
Hey, Victor, I haven't seen you in a long time. I hear you've been out quite a bit lately.
Yeah, I had the flu get the better of me. How you doing? It's great to see you.
Great. They got me off the blacktop, baby. I got a promotion.
That's great.
Now that I'm supervisor, my wife doesn't like it any better.
It's hot in here.
You hot? I'm not hot. You shouldn't be in such a hurry. Since I got this position,
Hey, Sonny,
I seem
listen,
to always be in a hurry.
I gotta get going, man. I'd love to talk to you, but I gotta do this paperwork.
Hey, do you know how Victor's been doing lately? I haven't worked with him for a while, and he looks really strung out.
He's a sweet guy. A little nervous, maybe.
You know, I could have sworn he looked messed up. I mean, I know the look, and this doesn't look right.
Joe's up in his office. Go ask him about it.
Nah, I don't want to pull a number on him. I mean, he's a friend of mine. But I am his supervisor. Hey, Victor, I want to talk to you. What the? What? You shooting up junk, man?
No, Sonny, please.
You're out of here.
Just
you're
let me explain.
fired.
Just give me a
As of
chance.
this minute.
No,
You think because you're my friend I won't notice this stuff?
You don't understand, man. Please, just let me
First
explain.
case have to be a friend.
No.
You're out of here. You're fired.
Sonny,
Get
you don't
out of
understand.
here.
Please, just let me explain.
As I'm sure you can tell, Sonny made a lot of mistakes. Sure, he was Victor's friend and a new supervisor, but don't think only new supervisors can make mistakes. Anybody can. So right now, during this training, is the right time for you to figure out what he should have done and how you would handle the situation. At the very least, Sonny should have let Victor explain. But if he'd stopped to think for a moment, right when he first had suspicions, a number of things could have gone right. When Victor excused himself, saying he had paperwork to do, that was Sonny's chance to correctly use the 4 steps of constructive confrontation: identification, documentation, confirmation, and confrontation. Sonny did correctly identify Victor's